U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has welcomed President Cyril Ramaphosa to the country. The president expected as well to meet with his American counterpart Joe Biden later today as the two nations come together in order to strengthen their relations. Our correspondent Simon Marks is joining us now live from Washington to bring us the latest. Good afternoon, Simon, South African time. Good morning in Washington. Well, there you are, there outside the South African embassy in Washington. I wonder what has taken you there, because a little bit earlier we had you live from outside Kamala Harris's residence, and we just brought live to our viewers the visuals of Ramaphosa arriving and being welcomed by Kamala.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. It is a glorious day here in Washington, D.C. And the first thing that Kamala Harris said to President Ramaphosa as he arrived at her residence, the Naval Observatory, which is just up the road from the South African embassy here on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, D.C., was that he clearly had brought South African weather with him. He's still in that meeting, as far as we know, with Kamala Harris, but he'll be coming here very soon for an event at which he will address veterans of the American civil rights struggle and American and other supporters of the anti-apartheid struggle. And they've started arriving for this event at the South African embassy, many of them on their way in, stopping to take pictures of themselves in front of that statue of Nelson Mandela that you can see behind me, where Nelson Mandela is saluting, looking out on Massachusetts Avenue. What you can't quite see is that on the other side of the street there's a statue of Winston Churchill in front of the British Embassy, where Winston Churchill is kind of looking back at Nelson Mandela. It's a very iconic place here in the centre of the US Capitol. But the day began, as you said, with President Ramaphosa's invitation to the Vice President's residence for breakfast. And in comments before that breakfast got underway, they both spoke about the importance of the day that is now underway here. President Ramaphosa, in about 3.5 hours' time, will become the first South African president to set foot in the White House since 2014 for that bilateral meeting with President Joe Biden. Kamala Harris spoke specifically about cooperation between the two governments on public health. She paid tribute to President Ramaphosa and to the South African government's leadership on security issues on the continent. She spoke about climate change as well. Those issues and others may have dominated the conversations that President Ramaphosa has been having with Vice President Kamala Harris. And in fact, I think we're going to see perhaps now President Ramaphosa's motorcade coming down Massachusetts Avenue. Certainly there's some movement of some of the Secret Service staff that are attached to visiting diplomats, and my suspicion is that this is going to be his motorcade arriving here at the embassy for the event that's due to get underway in about 20 minutes' time. That event where President Ramaphosa will be speaking to veterans of the civil rights and anti-apartheid struggles here. Visiting South African presidents always like to make time for those encounters. I think we can safely say this is definitely President Ramaphosa's motorcade. We're going to see if we can turn our camera carefully and get you pictures of the president's motorcade coming down Embassy Row, Massachusetts Avenue here in Washington, D.C. All the various international countries have their embassies on this particular street, many of them including South Africa's, and there you can see the cars carrying Cyril Ramaphosa and other members of the South African delegation coming into the embassy following the president's meeting with Kamala Harris. In fact, I can just see the president through the windows of the car that is driving into the embassy now. So he's now here, we're here, veterans of the civil rights and anti-apartheid struggles are here. We might get an update from him. We're hoping to bring it to you live in a few minutes about how those conversations with Kamala Harris went. Remember, a full agenda that also includes thorny issues like Ukraine and America's plan, the Senate's plan to pass that Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa Act, a real mouthful of a piece of legislation, but big questions here about whether President Biden is going to sign it into law. President Ramaphosa, we know, is spending time here today heavily and strongly lobbying against it.
Simon, before I let you go, because I think you're going to want to make it inside, maybe to capture some of the remarks that will be made there. The meeting with Joe Biden is going to be happening later today. You've mentioned the question of Ukraine. Things have been dynamic and very fluid on the ground, with Ukraine claiming to be regaining some of the territory that was under Russian invasion. But Vladimir Putin sticking to his guns to say no talks, no negotiations. South Africa's position has been to say we need dialogue to end the conflict.
Look, I think it's pretty clear that on the issue of Ukraine, the American government is in a listening mode as far as President Ramaphosa is concerned. They said it was essential last night for President Biden to hear his perspectives on the security situation and on how to end the conflict. Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor has been promoting here the concept of forming an eminent persons group to try and negotiate some kind of an end to the conflict. But the two governments have also made it pretty clear that they're not going to find common ground over South Africa's traditional friendship and positive relations with Russia. And I think you're going to see very little focus on that in the official readouts of the meetings that have been underway here. The Americans hear where the South Africans stand, but it's not immediately apparent that they plan to act on the ideas that are being presented here this week by President Ramaphosa and by the foreign minister. And, you know, it's a complicated time for the visit. It comes at the end of a 10-day period in which the Russian armed forces have suffered substantial losses and setbacks in Ukraine, but also on the very day that Joe Biden is going to be announcing billions of dollars in additional military assistance for Ukraine. So it's going to be a complicated issue, and I suspect they will try to prioritise other matters, particularly trade and investment, in their telling of the importance of this meeting.
Thank you very much. Simon Marks, our correspondent there outside the South African Embassy in Washington, D.C. We just saw a short while ago the motorcade of President Cyril Ramaphosa arriving there. He's going to be meeting with the veterans of the civil rights movement in America and, of course, veterans of the anti-apartheid struggle as well, as he continues with his itinerary today, starting off with a breakfast date with Vice President Kamala Harris, and later on he's going to be meeting with his American counterpart, Joe Biden.